You are being ranked right now, not metaphorically, not eventually, right now. Your credit score is being calculated. Your resume is sitting in a queue, waiting to be scored by software before any human reads it. The platform you used this morning has already decided how much of your content to show and to whom, based on signals you did not choose and cannot fully see. We live inside sorting machines. We did not build them yesterday. We have been building them for a very long time. But one civilization built an early version, at scale, institutionally, across an entire empire, and ran it for over 1,000 years. And the logic it embedded is still running. China was running this at civilizational scale in the 7th century, not as a metaphor, not as a small experiment, as a sophisticated, institutionalized, empire-wide system that lasted for roughly 1,300 years. The imperial examination system took men from across the empire, subjected them to standardized written tests, produced ranked results, and used those results to staff the bureaucracy that governed hundreds of millions of people. This was not an accident of history. It was a design choice. And understanding that design choice tells you something important, not just about China, but about the sorting machines you live inside today. The standardized test you took in high school, the resume screener that filtered your application before a human saw it, the credit score that determines whether you can borrow money, the algorithm that decides how visible your work becomes. These are not modern inventions operating on modern logic. They are iterations of something much older. But before we enter Imperial China, we need to make one thing clear. The examination system was not open to everyone. Women were excluded entirely. Certain occupational classes faced formal barriers. Wealth shaped who could afford years of study, tutors, texts, the time to prepare. Regional inequality meant that access varied dramatically depending on where you were born. This matters, and it is not a footnote. A system that excluded most of its population from formal participation while using merit as its legitimating language was not a meritocracy in the modern sense. It was something more specific, and in some ways more interesting than that label suggests. Because what makes the examination system worth understanding is not that it was fair, it wasn't, but that it was different from what came before it, and from what existed elsewhere, and that difference matters, not just for understanding China, but for understanding how modern societies still sort people today. Here is the actual problem the examination system was designed to solve. How do you staff an empire? Not a city-state, not a small kingdom, an empire spanning millions of square kilometers, requiring administrators who could manage laws, taxes, records, granaries, and local order, in thousands of locations simultaneously, without modern communications, without spreadsheets, without any of the coordination tools we take for granted. One answer is the obvious one: hereditary aristocracy. Give power to families, let sons inherit the positions of fathers, keep governance inside bloodlines. Many civilizations chose this answer. China tried it and found it insufficient. The problem with hereditary governance is not primarily a moral one. It is a practical one. Competent fathers produce incompetent sons. Aristocratic families accumulate power and resist central control. The dynasty that depends on a fixed set of families to govern depends on the continued quality and loyalty of those families, which it cannot guarantee. There had to be another answer. That colder answer was the meritocratic sorting machine. Here is how it worked as a system. Input: men from eligible groups across the empire. Process: standardized written examinations, administered at local, provincial, and national levels. Output: ranked scores that sorted candidates into pass and fail. Reward: the highest scores received degrees, official titles, and access to government positions, with all the status, income, and social power that followed. Not blood, not land, not sacred hierarchy. Text, examination, rank. Now this system has been called a meritocracy. And in a narrow, technical sense, that label fits. It evaluated candidates on demonstrated performance rather than inherited status. But calling it a meritocracy can mislead, not because the word is wrong, but because it imports too many modern assumptions. The imperial examination was not designed to produce equality. It was not designed to give everyone a fair chance. It was not designed to measure all forms of human capability, or even most of them. It was designed to solve a governance problem. The reason it matters is not because it was fair, but because it made exam-measured merit the official language of upward mobility in one of the largest states in human history. And once that language became official, everything changed. Think about what it means for a door to exist. If power is purely hereditary, there is no door. The wall is solid. Your position is determined at birth. No action you take changes the fundamental calculus. But the existence of that door changed the logic of the entire civilization. Because once the door exists, status is no longer explained only by blood. It can also be explained by performance. This is a profound shift, not in outcomes, which remain deeply unequal, but in the theory of why inequality exists. The target was not inequality. Inequality was assumed. The target was one particular kind of inequality, the kind that locks power permanently inside bloodlines. Not the unfairness of birth, the unfairness of competition. To understand what made China's approach distinctive, it helps to place it alongside two other systems operating in the same broad era. These are simplified models, not complete histories. Real societies were always messier, but each system reveals a different core logic for making hierarchy legitimate. India, the Varna system. Input birth into a particular jati and Varna. Measurement, ritual classification based on hereditary purity. Output, a fixed social position that determined what work you could do, who you could marry, and what sacred role you occupied in the cosmic order. Your position was not merely legal or social, it was spiritually sanctioned. The logic here is cosmic stability. Hierarchy is legitimate because it reflects the order of the universe. Questioning your rank is not just rebellion, it is a misunderstanding of reality. Europe, the feudal system at its height. Input, birth into a particular family, bound to a particular piece of land. Measurement, inheritance. Who was your father? What land did he hold? Output, a ranked position in a hierarchy of nobles, knights, clergy, freemen, and serfs. Cities, guilds, and the church also created pockets of mobility. The merchant who accumulated wealth, the monk who rose through ecclesiastical ranks, the craftsman who achieved guild standing. But the dominant logic of legitimate authority ran through land and blood. The logic here is land tenure. You govern because your family has always governed this territory. The hierarchy is legitimate because it is ancestral and endorsed by sacred authority. China, the examination system. Men from eligible groups across the empire. The input was not literally every man, but a far broader pool than hereditary aristocracy allowed. Measurement, performance on standardized written examinations. Output, ranked scores, degrees, and access to official positions. An open system promises broad access. A permeable system keeps gates, but makes some of them passable. China built a permeable system, not open, not equal, but structured so that the gate could be passed by someone who had not been born on the right side of it. What each system was targeting also differs. India targeted cosmic stability. Hierarchy reflects the sacred order. Europe targeted land tenure. Hierarchy reflects ancestral claims to territory. China targeted the quality of the bureaucracy. Hierarchy should reflect demonstrated governing capability. These are different answers to the same question. Why is this person above that person? And different answers produce different civilizations. Because when a system says power flows from birth and land, it produces one set of incentives, one set of aspirations, one theory of what a person should be. When a system says power flows from examination performance, it produces a different set. The source of hierarchy's legitimacy was partially relocated, and that relocation had consequences, not just for who ended up in power, but for how an entire society understood itself. A hierarchy justified by birth and a hierarchy justified by competition produce very different psychological worlds. In its mature form, especially in later dynasties, the examination system was not a single test. It was a tiered ladder. At the bottom, the county and prefectural examinations, which produced the Sheng Yuan, the entry-level degree that opened further doors but conferred little power on its own. Above that, the provincial examinations held every 3 years, which produced the Jurin degree. This was already a significant achievement. It brought local prestige and some official access. At the top, the metropolitan and palace examinations in the capital, which produced the Jinshi degree. Especially in later dynasties, this was the summit. The Jinshi graduate entered the highest tier of official service. The gap between the bottom of the ladder and the top was measured in years, often decades of study. Most who attempted it failed repeatedly. Some never climbed past the first rung. But the theoretical possibility was real, and periodically demonstrated. There is a famous image in Chinese literature, probably more legend than biography, but culturally true. In the morning, a peasant. By evening, standing in the hall of the Son of Heaven. The image captures something real about what the system promised, even if the reality was rarer and harder than the legend suggests. The design was not to erase birth, it was to make birth less absolute. The pass rates were brutally low. At the Jinshi level, especially in periods of peak competition, a tiny fraction of candidates succeeded. The national Jinshi pool in many periods numbered only in the hundreds per examination cycle. Out of a much larger population of aspirants moving through the examination ladder, this means most who sat the examinations spent years in serious preparation and failed. The system required enormous investment for a low probability outcome, and yet, families invested anyway, because the asymmetry of the reward was so extreme that even a small probability of the highest degree justified the effort. Which produced a secondary effect. Consider what happened to a merchant family in the Song dynasty. Merchants occupied a formerly low position in the official hierarchy, below scholars, farmers, and artisans. Yet, Song merchants could accumulate substantial wealth. Wealth alone did not buy status. Wealth alone did not open the doors of official service. But it could purchase books. It could hire tutors. It could free sons from commercial labor. It could, over a generation or two, position a family to compete in the examinations. One successful Jinshi in a merchant lineage transformed the family's social position, not just the individuals. The machine was evaluating performance, not parentage, but the preparation for performance was deeply shaped by resources, time, and family investment. The machine absorbed talent from below and standardized it from above, and that design had a cost. Under a hereditary system, failure has a particular logic. The aristocrat who cannot govern inherits authority anyway. The incompetent son takes the position. The family holds the land regardless of whether anyone in it is equipped to manage it. This is obviously inefficient, but it has one notable feature. Your position was decided before you acted, which means failure is not your fault. If you are born into a low position, the explanation is external: birth, lineage, or sacred order. It does not always make failure feel like your fault. Under an examination system, the logic changes. If the examination is the legitimate measure of who deserves to rise, and you do not rise, the system makes one explanation very hard to escape: you did not perform well enough. Not in the world, not in the story the machine tells. This is a different kind of psychological burden. The examination system distributed not just degrees and positions. It distributed an account of why people ended up where they did. And that account was increasingly personalized, internalized. There is another cost. The examination rewarded specific outcomes: status, income, networks, visible markers of rank. These flowed to those who succeeded at the highest prestige level. The examination primarily measured classical learning, essay composition, and moral political argumentation. These were real skills. Governing the empire required reading, writing, and reasoning. What it was not designed to reward was a different list. Military strategy, valued in theory, sidelined in practice during civilian-dominant dynasties. Commercial acumen, actively penalized in the official hierarchy. Technical knowledge, engineering, agriculture, medicine, useful, but not examined at the top level. Local expertise, deep knowledge of particular regions, industries, trades. A civilization organized around one definition of demonstrated excellence will tend to produce more of that excellence, and less of what it does not measure. The Song dynasty produced extraordinary commercial and technological sophistication at the same time that its examination system channeled the most ambitious men toward classical mastery. These two things coexisted, but they existed in tension. The talent that flowed toward examination success was talent not flowing toward other things. A civilization that chose the unfairness of competition over the unfairness of birth purchased something real and paid for it in something real. Now look at where you are. The Imperial examination system was abolished in 1905. What replaced it was not the absence of sorting. What replaced it was a proliferation of sorting. You already know this part. You have lived it. The SAT, the GRE, the GMAT, the bar exam, the medical licensing examination, the civil service test. These are the obvious ones. Systems that openly preserve the examination as gate logic, but they are not where the sorting stops. After the exams come the credentials, the degree from the ranked university, the GPA that summarizes years of academic performance into a single decimal point, the name of the institution that follows you into every professional interaction for the rest of your career. Then the resume, filtered before any human reads it, by software that scores your professional history against a model of what a successful candidate looks like. Then the performance review, the stack ranking, the quarterly rating, the promotion decision that reduces years of work into a category, exceeds expectations, meets expectations, below expectations. Then the platform, the credit score that determines whether you can borrow money, the driver rating that determines whether you get assigned rides, the seller rating that determines whether your products appear in search results, the content algorithm that decides whether your voice reaches anyone at all. At every stage of modern life, in nearly every domain, there is a measurement, a ranking, and a consequence. The architecture should now look familiar. The operating logic is structurally similar to the examination logic Imperial China developed over centuries. Take eligible people, apply a standardized evaluation, produce a rank, use the rank to determine access. The input has changed, the measurement has changed, the output format has changed. The logic is still familiar. China's examination machine used classical texts. Modern systems use data, behavioral data, academic data, financial data, engagement data. The medium is different. There is one important difference worth naming. The Imperial examination told you explicitly what it was testing. Study the classical canon, master the essay forms, understand the moral and political arguments. The curriculum was published, the criteria were declared. You could disagree with what was being measured, but you knew what was being measured. Many modern ranking systems do not offer this. The algorithm that shapes your credit score uses variables you may not fully audit. The model that filters your resume weights factors you cannot inspect. The recommendation system that decides whether your content reaches an audience operates through processes that even their designers cannot always fully explain or audit. The imperial examination was a visible gate. Modern sorting is often an invisible one. This does not make it more neutral. It makes it harder to question. And now there is something new. For most of history, sorting systems required human labor. Examiners had to read papers. Hiring managers had to review applications. Creditors had to assess borrowers. That friction created a natural limit on how much sorting a society could do. Artificial intelligence dramatically weakens that limit. Automated screening can evaluate millions of applications in the time it takes a human examiner to read one. Algorithmic credit assessment can score borrowers in milliseconds. Recommendation systems can rank billions of pieces of content against billions of users in real time. The examination machine has been automated, accelerated, and distributed to a scale that no imperial bureaucracy could have imagined. Which returns us to the question China's machine raises, and that the modern machine has not answered. Every ranking system measures something, and every measurement reflects the values of the people who designed it. The imperial examination measured what the state defined as governing capability: classical learning, moral argument, textual performance. That definition shaped an entire civilization, what families invested in, what young men aspired to, what kinds of human capability received prestige, and what kinds did not. Today's sorting systems are also measuring something. And that brings us back to the question we began with. We began with a claim: you are being ranked right now. You have spent the last several minutes sitting inside the question that claim was pointing at. Not just, am I being ranked, but by what, for what, and who decided? China's examination system lasted roughly 1,300 years. In that time, it shaped what millions of families invested in, what children were taught to value, what kind of intelligence was legible, and what kind was not. What kind of person could rise and what kind would remain invisible to the state, regardless of their actual capabilities. It did not do this through force alone. It did it by making its logic seem like the only logic, by making the ranked outcome feel like the natural outcome, by making failure feel like personal failure, and success feel like deserved success. That is the deepest technology of any sorting machine, not the gate itself, but the story the gate tells about why it is there. Now look at the machines sorting your life. The algorithm that decides whether your resume moves forward is measuring something. The platform that decides whether your content reaches an audience is measuring something. The system that decides whether you receive credit, admission, access, visibility, all of them are measuring something. The question is always the same: what and why? These are not technical questions, they are political ones. A society that outsources those decisions to systems it doesn't examine has not escaped the problem that the imperial examination raised. It has just made the problem harder to see. For roughly 1,300 years, imperial institutions defined what counted as merit. We are now asking algorithms to define it for us. The dynasty at least had a name. The algorithm often does not. Here is what China's experiment actually teaches. Not that meritocracy works. Not that examination systems are just. Not that the door being open is the same as the door being fair. What it teaches is this: every civilization must answer the question of how to distribute power and access. Every civilization reaches for some technology to make that distribution feel legitimate. China reached for the examination. Europe reached for land and blood. Modern societies have reached for credentials, algorithms, and data. None of these technologies are neutral. All of them produce winners and losers according to definitions that were chosen by someone at some point for reasons that may no longer apply or that may never have been examined at all. The machine is always designed. The question is whether you know who designed it and whether you have any say. China built one version of this machine and ran it for over a millennium. The world did not simply copy the machine, but it kept rediscovering the logic. We are still running it, in different forms, at different speeds, at scales the original architects could not have conceived, and we are still mostly not asking the questions that the machine most needs us to ask. Who decided what this measures? What does it miss? What kind of human being does it make legible, and what kind does it render invisible? China's 7th century experiment forces these questions into view. They are questions for you, right now. If you want more history like this, not as nostalgia, not as identity, but as operating systems, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.